The gathering of gentish skies over Luzon's city gleamed with the shimmer of private jets cutting through the clouds like steel birds. Beneath them, towering spires of glass and chrome kissed the sun, and the air vibrated with the electric anticipation of genius, money, and ego converging in one place. It was the annual Technova Summit, an event where the world's most powerful innovators, tech moguls, and billionaire investors came not just to showcase their latest creations, but to outshine each other in brilliance and bravado. The 113 story. Centaurus Dome, the venue of the summit, was already buzzing with activity as the world's wealthiest minds arrived, each more flamboyant than the last. Inside the grand auditorium, the energy pulsed with excitement. A colossal stage had been erected, its backdrop a vivid projection of machinery numbers and futuristic schematics swirling in slow motion. The centerpiece of this year's summit was the unveiling and mysterious failure of the DTX-97 engine, a prototype for what was supposed to be the most powerful and efficient hypercar engine ever designed. But the engine, despite its promise, had failed catastrophically during testing, and no engineer in any laboratory or university had been able to determine why. The engine, some whispered, was cursed. Others believed it was simply beyond a grasp of current science. Victor Rothmore, a household name in the tech world and a billionaire many times over, stepped onto the stage dressed in his signature obsidian black suit, his white hair slicked back, his expression somewhere between arrogance and amusement. He took the microphone, his voice amplified and theatrical. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, arms spread as if addressing the heavens, "we stand at the edge of the impossible." The DTX-97 was supposed to change the world, a feat of engineering so pure, so powerful, that it would redefine the laws of speed and energy. And yet, it lies dead, silent, an enigma even to our brightest minds. A dramatic spotlight illuminated the engine sitting on a rotating glass pedestal. The chrome and carbon fiber frame of the machine glimmered under the lights like a fallen god. "We've summoned the greatest minds to try to fix it," Victor continued. "Engineers from MIT, Caltech, Tokyo U, and beyond. We've spent months, millions trying to breathe life back into it. And still, nothing. Until now." He paused for dramatic effect. "Today, I issue a final challenge. A last, open invitation to anyone who believes they can fix the unfixable. Winner takes $10 million and eternal glory. But let me be clear, I believe it can't be done." The room erupted with laughter, applause, and murmured excitement. Journalists rushed to tweet the announcement. Engineers whispered to one another. Social media exploded with theories and sarcasm in equal measure. Who would dare try? Who could? Backstage, unnoticed by most, stood a woman in dusty overalls, her brown hair pulled into a loose bun, a canvas bag slung over one shoulder. She wasn't invited to the stage or even listed among the guests. She hadn't flown in on a jet or arrived in a limousine. She came by bus, carrying a notebook, a pair of gloves, and a quiet belief that maybe, just maybe, she could see what others couldn't. Her name was Eliza Hart, a mechanic from the tiny rural town of Millbend, where paved roads ended and cattle outnumbered people. She didn't have a formal degree, had never been featured on any podcast or business panel, and didn't know what venture capital even meant until 2 years ago. But she had something else, the kind of intuition that came from fixing real machines with her hands, from rebuilding things not because of theory, but because someone's livelihood depended on it. Eliza's invitation hadn't come from Technova. She had stumbled across a leaked live stream of last year's summit, watched the unveiling of the DTX-97 with fascination, and noticed something odd even in the brief glimpses of its internal structure. It nagged at her for months, so she wrote an open letter to the summit's engineering committee, politely pointing out a potential airflow conflict in the fuel chamber design. Most never replied, but a junior assistant named Rhea from the committee sent a private email 2 weeks ago, asking if she'd be willing to examine the engine up close, of the record. Now here she was, in her only good boots, holding her breath as she walked quietly toward the stage. Victor Rothmore glanced down at the floor assistant, whispering something in his ear. He looked momentarily confused, then raised an eyebrow. "It appears," he said, turning back to the crowd, "that we have a volunteer." Gasps and murmurs swept the room. The spotlight turned slightly, illuminating Eliza as she stepped up from the side stairs. She didn't flinch from the brightness or the stares. She simply nodded politely at Victor and adjusted the strap of her bag. Victor couldn't help but smirk. "And who might you be?" "Eliza Hart," she said, her voice even. "I work out of Milpin Auto and Tractor. I came to look at the engine." The audience chuckled. Some outright laughed. The idea of a farm mechanic attempting what elite scientists couldn't was laughable, or so they thought. Victor raised a skeptical brow. "Miss Hart, do you understand the complexity of what you're attempting?" "Yes," Eliza said. "I've studied the DTX design for almost a year. I've rebuilt 4 engines of similar structure in agricultural machinery. The problem isn't complexity. It's attention. A pause followed. Then silence. Victor, sensing an opportunity for entertainment, gestured grandly. Then by all means, show us your attention. Eliza approached the engine. The crowd leaned in. Camera zoomed. She opened her canvas bag and took out a small flashlight, a magnetized pick, a pair of wand gloves, and a spiral-bound notebook filled with drawings and equations, some hand-drawn, some copied from obscure engineering journals. What followed over the next hour was not a show of flash or flare. It was quiet, deliberate, almost sacred. Eliza inspected every bolt and vent, humming softly to herself. She tapped the side of the frame, felt for vibrations with her fingertips, ran a diagnostic connector she had built herself. She worked as though no one were watching, but everyone was. Rothmore began to grow impatient. "Do you need assistance?" he asked, condescendingly. "No," Eliza replied. "But I do need silence." He blinked. The room fell quiet. Then she turned to the assembly and said, "This engine didn't fail because of a flaw. It was made to fail." The words echoed like a fire alarm. "What do you mean?" Victor asked, his voice no longer playful. Eliza held up a thin wire she had extracted from deep inside the housing. It was no thicker than a hair, but had a microcircuit attached, not part of any official blueprint. "Someone embedded a feedback disruptor here," she said. "It creates a forced thermal loop in the combustion chamber, making the sensors overcorrect until the engine seizes." Gasps rippled through the auditorium. The engineers in the front rows leaned forward in disbelief. Victor stepped down from the stage, peering at the wire. "Impossible. That's not in the specs." "I know," Eliza said. "That's the point." Suddenly, chaos erupted. Cameras flashed. Security whispered into earpieces. Some billionaires began accusing each other of sabotage. Was it a corporate rival? Industrial espionage? A power play from within? But Eliza didn't care. She turned back to the engine, brushed away a smear of oil, and said, "I can fix it. But I'll need time. And I'll need you all to stop interfering." Victor stared at her, his ego flickering between pride and embarrassment. Finally, he nodded. "You have 3 days," he said. Eliza looked down at the engine again. "That's all I need." The woman in the workshop beneath the Centaurus dome had never been used like this before. Designed as a showcase for cutting-edge engineering exhibitions, it was sterile, pristine, and far more symbolic than practical. Its floors gleamed with synthetic marble, its robotic arms suspended from the ceiling like metallic vines, waiting to be directed by algorithms and commands. But now it was cluttered with hand-drawn sketches, grease-stained rags, and the scent of burning solder. It no longer resembled a science exhibit. It looked like a real workshop, and Eliza Hart was the reason why. She had barely slept since stepping off the stage 3 nights ago. After exposing the planted sabotage within the DTX-97 engine, the summit's board reluctantly granted her a sealed lab space and limited access to their tools. What they didn't expect was for her to refuse half of them. Eliza preferred her own methods, tactile, intuitive, and utterly foreign to the systemized rigidity of modern labs. She had brought in her own torque wrench, a custom pressure gauge she crafted from a lawnmower piston, and a 3D printed airflow tester shaped like a hummingbird. Every inch of her workspace was covered in blueprints, some official, others redrawn from memory and adjusted according to what she had seen inside the engine. As news of her efforts spread, curious onlookers began to gather outside the viewing class. At first, they were students and interns, but soon technicians and rival engineers joined them. Most watched with expressions ranging from curiosity to disbelief. Eliza worked alone, focused and tireless, her ponytail swaying slightly every time she leaned into the engine cavity to check alignment or measure resistance. At one point, Rhea, the assistant who had originally forwarded Eliza's letter, entered the lab, holding 2 paper cups of coffee. She was the only one who didn't treat Eliza like an anomaly. "You haven't eaten in 12 hours, she said, placing the coffee on a nearby tray. "I brought you the strong stuff." Eliza looked up, blinking. "Has it really been 12? 14? "Technically, but I thought 12 sounded more polite." Eliza gave a faint smile and accepted the coffee. She took a sip, winced at the bitterness, then sipped again. "Thank you." Rhea walked around the engine, careful not to touch anything. "They're talking about you upstairs," she said. "The board, the sponsors, Rothmore especially. Half of them are convinced you're bluffing. The other half are terrified you're not." Eliza wiped her hands on a rack and returned her gaze to the exposed combustion assembly. "I'm not interested in their fear. I'm interested in the truth. Do you really think someone did this on purpose?" Eliza looked her in the eyes. "I don't think." "I know. The loop distortion wasn't an accident, it was timed. The disruptor chip was set to activate precisely during the public trial run. Someone wanted this engine to fail. And more importantly, they wanted it to fail. In public." Rhea crossed her arms. "But why?" "That's what I'm trying to find out."
But I can't do that unless I rebuild the internal balance structure.
Whoever designed this engine originally, they were brilliant, but they were rushed
Or manipulated. The
next few hours were consumed by what Eliza referred to as deep listening.
She would place a small speaker against the engine housing and play low-frequency pulses through it, then observe how the vibrations traveled through each component. It was an old technique one her father had taught her back when they used to fix farm equipment by ear. Every engine has a song, he used to say. If it sings wrong, something's lying. The DTX-97 sang all right, and Eliza could hear where the melody faltered. In the early hours of the morning, she discovered a subtle torsion imbalance in the left rotor, caused by a misaligned magnetic coil.
She fixed it in under an hour.
Later that day, she recalibrated
the airflow regulators using a butterfly valve she fabricated from scratch using recycled drone parts. Each repair drew more watchers, more murmurs of astonishment, and more attention from the media.
By the end of the second day, global headlines were calling her the engine whisperer. But not everyone was pleased. Victor Rothmar watched from
the control room, his fingers steepled beneath his chin, his expression unreadable.
He had invested over $50 million into the DTX project, and its failure had embarrassed him in front of the entire Technova board.
Now, nobody was threatening to reverse everything, not just the technical outcome, but the very narrative he had carefully sculpted. She's gaining momentum, said a man in a tailored suit behind him.
Our shareholders are watching closely.
If she succeeds, she won't, Victor interrupted. But what if she won't? Victor stood slowly. She's not one of us. She doesn't understand how this world works. She thinks it's about machines and integrity.
It's about leverage.
And she has none. The man hesitated.
Still, sir, if I may suggest we prepare a contingency in case, do it quietly, Victor said. And if she gets too close,
introduce friction. Back in the workshop, Eliza ran her latest simulations and diagnostics. The engine was now 75% functional, up from the 23% it had reported 3 days earlier.
But something still felt off. One small component remained dormant, the tertiary ignition synchronizer, the last bolt, as she called it. No matter how perfectly aligned everything else was, that component refused to operate.
She reviewed every schematic, ran every test,
but there was no apparent reason for its silence, until she flipped back through her notebook and noticed a single line she had copied from a decommissioned engine manual. Synchronous ignition fails when there is a non-native thermal
presence.
Her eyes widened. It wasn't a mechanical problem.
It was a material one. She stood up, heart racing.
Someone had replaced the synchronizer's heat shielding with an alloy that expanded unevenly at high RPMs. It was subtle, barely detectable,
unless you measured it while the engine was under specific pressure and temperature conditions. But it meant one thing. The engine had been doomed from the start, and someone had planned it. She documented everything, took photographs, and sealed the faulty component in a labeled bag. Then she went to find Rhea. They met in a service corridor just outside the lab. You were right, Eliza said. It was deliberate.
Someone tampered with the material composition of the ignition shield.
And I don't think it was just to make the engine fail. I think it was to frame the designer. Rhea stiffened.
You mean Dr. Keiji Sato?
Eliza nodded.
His name was on the early schematics, but I looked at his other work, his designs.
Never used this alloy.
In fact, he specifically warned against it in a 2017 paper. That's why he disappeared, Rhea whispered. They said he went into hiding after the engine failure.
But what if he didn't? Eliza's face was grave.
Then someone made him disappear. They returned to the lab.
Eliza carefully
began replacing the sabotage component with a custom shield she forged from titanium-coated ceramic.
It took her 8 hours.
When it was finally complete, she stepped back, sweat streaking her temple, her hands trembling from exhaustion. The engine was whole again. But it wasn't just the machine that was repaired.
It was the truth, taking shape through gears and coils and intention. That evening, Rothmore visited the lab. He stood just outside the glass, watching silently. Eliza
met his gaze but said nothing. Impressive work, he said finally. It's not done yet. Oh, but it is, he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The board has decided to end the challenge early.
They're worried about safety, liability, optics. Eliza narrowed her eyes.
No, you're worried. Let's not make this personal. It already is. He stepped closer.
You're talented, Eliza. I'll give you that.
But you don't belong here. This world isn't built for people like you. It's built for people who understand the game.
Who play it well. I don't play games, she said. Exactly. With that, he turned and left. Eliza watched him disappear down the corridor, then turned back to the engine. She reached for the ignition switch, her fingers hovering over it. 3 days.
That was all she had. And tomorrow, the world would see
what 3 days and a woman who never stopped listening could accomplish.
The secret beneath the metal-themed morning of the 4th day arrived not with celebration, but with a subtle tension that crackled through the marble halls of the Centaurus dome like static before a storm.
Rumors had begun to swirl even before the sun had risen. Stories of sabotage, corporate espionage, and a simple mechanic who might have unraveled more than just an engine. Journalists huddled in CAFs nearby, their screens glowing with speculation.
Engineers whispered behind clipboards, wondering whether the woman with grease on her sleeves might have succeeded where they had failed. But at the heart of it all, deep within the soundproofed lab, Eliza Hart stood alone beside the DTX-97, staring at the final set of calibration readouts. The engine was complete,
Reassembled, refined, and fully functional, at least, according to her instruments. It now ran with 99.6% internal efficiency, the highest recorded since its inception.
The once silent ignition synchronizer now responded in perfect harmony with the rest of the system. Every sensor, every wire, every gear turned as if they had always belonged together. But despite the perfection of her repairs, Eliza couldn't
shake the feeling that something else was still buried within the machine, not broken but hidden. She pulled up a stool beside the engine's primary housing and opened her notebook once more, flipping to the page where she had scribbled a
spore diagram, the transmission bridge layout, according to official schematics.
Her eyes narrowed as she traced the lines.
Something about the component distribution still didn't match what she had observed during reassembly. And then she saw it, a half-centimeter cavity between the dual-phase manifold and the resonance chamber that wasn't noted anywhere in the blueprints. It shouldn't have been there. She grabbed her scope, slid beneath the engine, and peered into the crevice.
At first, she saw only shadow.
Then, as she adjusted the angle of her light, a tiny glint caught her eye.
Not a bolt, not a wire, but something flat, metallic.
She reached in with her magnetized pick, and after a few minutes of careful maneuvering, extracted a small rectangular object no larger than a postage stamp.
It was coated in thermal shielding.
But Eliza recognized the pattern instantly. A quantum data shard, designed to operate independently of the main circuitry.
An illegal one. Her breath caught. These shards were banned in most jurisdictions. Too easy to hide, too dangerous in the wrong hands. Used by intelligence operatives, black market tech traffickers, and apparently billion-dollar corporations.
This one had been implanted inside the engine not by mistake, but by intention.
It hadn't malfunctioned. It had been spying. Eliza
hurried to the far side of the lab and placed the shard into her reader, a device she had built herself years ago to help farmers decode encrypted control chips in corporate brand tractors. The screen flickered, then displayed lines of compressed data, quickly auto-translating into a mix of design schematics, command logs, and to her surprise, internal messages. She scrolled through line after line, until one particular message stopped her cold.
Begin phase 2 only if public demonstration fails. Blame assigned to Sato. Leverage Rothmore's silence. Engine core must be recovered intact. Alternate asset available if Hart interferes. Eliza's hands trembled slightly. So she had been right. This wasn't just about an engine. It was about erasure. Dr. K.G. Sato, the original creator of the DTX-97, hadn't disappeared because of failure or disgrace. He had been framed.
And Victor Rothmore had known the entire time. The sound of the lab door unlocking startled her.
She quickly slid the reader into her bag just as Rhea stepped in, her face pale. You need to get to the auditorium, Rhea said. Now. They've moved up the demonstration. Rothmore just announced that the engine will be tested publicly without your permission. What? Eliza stood up. He doesn't have the authority. He forged it, Rhea said. Claimed you submitted approval this morning.
He brought in his own technicians.
They're powering it up right now. Eliza didn't wait. She bolted past Rhea, through the corridor, down the elevators, past security who didn't dare stop
her.
She emerged into the vast, glass-ceilinged auditorium where 1,000 spectators had already gathered. The DTX-97, her engine, stood on a polished steel platform surrounded by display monitors and high-speed cameras. Victor Rothmore stood at the podium, addressing the crowd. And so, thanks to the collaborative spirit of our global innovators,
he said with a carefully curated smile, we have restored functionality to the DTX-97. Today, you will witness its rebirth and the future of propulsion technology.
Eliza burst through the crowd, breathless. Stop the test, she shouted. All heads turned.
A wave of murmurs spread like wildfire. Victor's eyes narrowed.
Miss Hart, he said, his tone calm but loaded. So good of you to join us. You can't run this test, she said, approaching the stage.
You don't know what you're powering up. Victor descended the steps to meet her, speaking into a microphone so all could hear.
Miss Hart, I understand your concern,
but I assure
you, our engineers have triple-checked every system.
The engine is fully safe. You don't know that, she said, because you didn't build it.
I did, and I found something inside it, something you didn't want anyone to see. She reached into her bag, pulling out the quantum data shard, and held it up to the nearest camera. The projection screens behind them magnified the object. This was embedded inside the core housing, she said. It contains data proving that this engine was designed to fail and that Keiji Sato was framed to cover it up. If you start it now, you risk activating a secondary sequence buried in the ignition logs, one that could destabilize the chamber. Gasps swept the auditorium. Victor's face shifted not with fear, but with anger. He grabbed the microphone.
This woman
is not a scientist, he snapped. She's a garage mechanic with no credentials.
A conspiracy theorist at best.
She snuck into this event and exploited our generosity. I was invited, Eliza said.
By your own committee.
And I can prove every word. The screens behind
them switched again, this time displaying a feed from Eliza's reader.
Rhea had connected the data stream to the projector booth. Messages,
schematics, commands.
All of it streamed across the display. The audience gasped again. Journalists stood up, taking photos. Several engineers rushed toward the stage, demanding
to verify the shot.
And then, from the back of the room, a new voice spoke. I can confirm her findings. Silence. A man stepped forward, thin, grey-bearded, and wearing dark glasses.
His voice was quiet but carried weight. My name is Dr. Keiji Sato.
And I've been in hiding for over a year. The room erupted into stunned chaos.
Cameras flashed. Security hesitated.
Victor Rothmore's face went ashen. Doctor Sato climbed the
stairs to the stage and faced the crowd. I was forced to disappear after my designs were compromised. I refused to approve the changes. Rothmore insisted on changes that would destabilize the engine.
When I protested, they cut off my access, doctored emails, and replaced components without my knowledge.
Victor moved to speak, but Keiji cut him off. You sold the DTX-97 as a revolutionary leap forward, he said.
But you were never interested in progress.
You wanted control.
And when the engine failed by design, you made sure I took the blame. The audience was now entirely on its feet. Technicians surrounded the engine. Legal counsel whispered urgently to the summit board.
Cameras turned from the engine to Rothmore, whose mask of confidence had finally cracked. Eliza turned to Keiji. Can we stop this sequence if it's already begun?
Keiji nodded. Yes, but we have to disable the secondary bypass and manually. He checked the loop core. It's risky. I've done worse with a corn harvester, Eliza muttered. Together, they approached the engine. Eliza slid beneath the platform, locating the secondary panel she had modified just hours before. With Keiji's guidance, she disconnected the bypass and released the core. The engine hissed, venting heat, then fell silent. Applause broke out, hesitant at first. Then thunderous. Rothmore was escorted from the stage by Summit security. That
evening, Eliza stood beside Keiji on the same stage where she had once been mocked. Cameras flashed.
Reporters shouted questions,
but she ignored them all.
She looked down at the engine. No longer a puzzle or a weapon or a pawn, but simply what it was meant to be. A marvel of human ingenuity. She took the microphone only once. I
didn't come here to expose anyone, she said. I came to fix something that was broken.
What I found was that the engine wasn't the only thing in need of repair. Sometimes what's buried in the metal says more about us than we want to hear. But if we listen closely, really listen, we can still set things right. A spark that changed everything. The days following the demonstration were unlike anything Eliza Hart had ever experienced. Within hours of the revelations of the sabotage, the quantum shard, and the unexpected return of Dr. Keiji Sato, the
news had traveled far beyond the walls of the Centaurus Dome. Headlines screamed across every screen. Rothmore exposed in engineering scandal. Mechanic from Melbourne saves billion-dollar project. And the lost bolt that changed it.
All, from dusty auto shops to global aerospace think tanks, Eliza's name became synonymous with integrity, ingenuity, and a kind of raw, untamed brilliance that the modern tech world had long since forgotten. But for Eliza, the real victory wasn't in the headlines. It came in the quiet, the morning after the demonstration, when she stood alone in the same glass-walled lab, watching the DTX-97 engine hum in perfect rhythm under her guidance. The noise was different, now no longer dissonant
or troubled, but fluid, like the breath of something alive and newly awakened. The roar had been tamed,
not by algorithms or lab simulations, but by intuition, patience, and listening. And now, the world wanted a piece of her. Offers flooded her inbox, contracts from elite firms, government R&D labs, international tech corporations, promising millions for her leadership and expertise.
Panels invited her to speak.
Ivy League schools offered her honorary doctorates.
Venture capitalists wanted to turn her into the face of humble innovation. Even Victor Rothmore's board, after publicly severing ties with their disgraced
founder, extended her an offer to lead the DTX program into its next phase. She turned down every single one. When Rhea visited her that afternoon,
she found Eliza sitting on the lab floor with a mug of strong black coffee, her notebook open, pencil tapping rhythmically against the page. You really said no to every offer?
Rhea asked, stunned. Eliza looked up. I didn't come here to be hired.
I came to fix what was broken.
That's done, but you could do anything now.
You could run a global company.
You could lose everything that made me who I am.
Eliza interrupted softly. This world doesn't need another CEO.
It needs someone to remind it how to listen. Rhea sat beside her, quiet for a moment.
What would you do instead?
Eliza smiled and flipped her notebook closed.
Go home, back in Millbend. The world moved slower.
The air smelled of oil
and cornfields. Sunlight fell lazily across the worn asphalt of Main Street, where a few rusted pickup trucks still chugged past the local diner.
And there, on the corner lot with the peeling white fence, stood Millbend Auto and Tractor. Unchanged since the day Eliza left. She reopened the shop that same week.
But this time, she did more than just fix engines.
She converted half the building into a classroom, a free technical learning space where anyone, young or old, could come and learn the fundamentals of machines.
No FEs, no tests.
Just curiosity and guidance. Word spread faster than she expected. Soon, a teenager who had dropped out of school was learning how to rebuild an alternator.
A retired coal miner drove 2 hours every week to study electrical schematics.
A single mother from a neighboring town brought her daughter to study diagnostics. Eliza taught them all not just how to tighten bolts, but how to see what others missed,
to hear what others ignored,
to treat machines not as problems, but as puzzles. She called the program their listening workshop. Within months, local news picked up the story.
Then national programs followed. And yet, Eliza refused to commercialize it.
Every donation went into tools and supplies. Every volunteer who joined was asked to bring not just knowledge, but patience. It was slow work. It was honest work.
It was real. One rainy afternoon, as thunder rolled in the distance and the students finished cleaning up for the day, a black sedan pulled up to the shop.
Out stepped Dr. Keiji Sato, wearing a long coat and holding a small leather case. You
weren't easy to find, he said as Eliza opened the door, wiping her hands on a rack. You didn't exactly leave your forwarding address either, she replied with a smile. He stepped inside, looked around at the old tools, the whiteboard, covered in sketches, and the students' projects lined up like proud sculptures. This is incredible, he said softly. It's honest, she replied.
And it's needed. They sat by the old coffee machine, the rain drumming on the tin roof. I never got to thank you, Keiji said.
For saving my name, for restoring the
engine, for standing up to them when I couldn't. You didn't need to thank me, she said. The engine told the truth.
I just listened. Keiji opened his case and pulled out a small prototype, a modified version of the DTX97, scaled down and redesigned with Eliza's innovations. I took your airflow mod and applied it to a wind turbine system.
Increased efficiency by 12%.
With your permission, I'd like to develop it further with you. Eliza studied the prototype.
It was elegant, balanced, and humming quietly with potential, but she shook her head. I'm flattered, she said, but I'm not leaving this place.
I've got students depending on me. Keiji looked around. Then maybe we build it here.
Together, they exchanged a nod that summer. The Hart Sato Institute of Applied Mechanics opened its doors beside the garage. It wasn't large, and it didn't look like much from the outside.
But inside, it became a place where ideas breathed, where failed designs were celebrated as lessons, and where the greatest minds were sometimes the ones who had
never been told they were brilliant. Years later,
when reporters returned to Millbend to ask Eliza about her legacy, she only ever said the same thing. I didn't come to build empires. I came to fix what's broken. They called her the woman who rebuilt the future, but Eliza never cared
for titles. She just kept listening. And beneath her shop, in the original test chamber of the DTX97, that engine still sat, humming quietly, like a heart remembering what it was to be whole.